The wind howled like a wounded animal through the canyon, and Wade Emerson knew if he didn't find shelter within the hour, he'd be just another frozen corpse come spring thaw. The November blizzard of 1884 had swept down from the Montana mountains, with a vengeance that surprised even those who'd lived their entire lives in the territory. And Wade cursed himself for not heeding old Samuel's warning back in Verde that morning. The rancher gripped his horse's reins tighter, his fingers already numb despite the thick leather gloves, and squinted through the wall of white that obscured everything beyond 3 feet. His cabin was still 2 miles north, and those 2 miles might as well have been 200 in these conditions. Then he saw it, a dark shape hunched against the base of a rocky outcrop, barely visible through the driving snow. Wade's first thought was that some fool had tried to weather the storm without proper shelter, and his second thought was that whoever it was would be dead by nightfall if left out here. He guided his stallion closer, dismounting with difficulty as his legs protested the cold, and approached what he now could see was definitely a person wrapped in inadequate clothing, shaking violently. "Hey there," Wade called out, his voice nearly stolen by the wind. "Can you hear me?" The figure stirred, and a face emerged from beneath a snow-covered shawl. A woman's face, pale as death itself, with lips tinged blue and eyes that struggled to focus. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound escaped. Wade didn't hesitate. He'd been raised by a mother who believed in helping those in need, regardless of circumstance, and he wasn't about to let anyone freeze to death on his watch. He pulled the woman to her feet, noting how light she felt, how her whole body trembled uncontrollably. "My cabin's not far. Can you ride?" She managed the smallest nod. Wade hoisted her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady while he gripped the reins with his other hand. The woman slumped against him, and he felt the coldness of her body even through their layers of clothing. The journey to his cabin took 45 minutes that felt like hours. Wade talked to the woman the entire time, trying to keep her conscious, though she barely responded. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle that would need tending once this storm passed, about anything that came to mind. When his cabin finally emerged from the white curtain ahead, relief flooded through him. Wade practically carried the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind them against the wind's assault. The cabin was cold, the fire having died to embers during his absence, but it was shelter from the deadly storm. He set the woman in his one good chair near the fireplace and immediately set about building up the fire, feeding it logs until flames roared back to life. "Need to get you out of these wet clothes," Wade said, trying to keep his voice professional despite the awkwardness of the situation. "You'll catch your death otherwise." The woman's eyes were barely open, but she nodded slightly. Wade grabbed several thick blankets from his bed and handed them to her. "Can you manage? I'll turn my back, tend to my horse." He did just that, heading back into the storm briefly to lead his stallion into the small barn attached to the side of the cabin. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, the woman had somehow managed to change and wrap herself in the blankets. Her wet clothes lay in a pile near the fire. Wade hung a rope across one corner and draped her clothes over it to dry, then set about making coffee and heating up the venison stew he'd made the day before. The woman watched him with half-lidded eyes, still shivering despite the growing warmth in the cabin. "What's your name?" Wade asked as he poured hot coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "I'm Wade Emerson." Her hands shook as she accepted the cup, and he had to help steady it as she took small sips. "Helena," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Helena Knightly." "Well, Miss Knightly, you're fortunate I came along when I did. What were you doing out in this storm? Helena took another sip of coffee before responding, her voice barely audible. My wagon overturned about a mile back. The horse bolted. I tried to walk, find help. Wade shook his head. In this territory, you stay with the wagon. But what's done is done. You're safe now. He brought her a bowl of stew, and though her hands still trembled, she managed to feed herself. Wade busied himself around the cabin, trying not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing details now that the immediate crisis had passed. Helena appeared to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair that fell in damp waves past her shoulders and striking green eyes that were regaining some of their clarity as warmth returned to her body. Even in her current state, wrapped in his old blankets, there was something refined about her that spoke of a life far removed from Montana ranch country. The wind continued its assault on the cabin throughout the evening, rattling the shutters and finding every tiny gap in the walls. Wade checked the windows, stuffing rags into the worst cracks, then added more logs to the fire. The temperature outside was still dropping, and he knew this blizzard would last at least through the night, possibly longer. You can have the bed, Wade said, gesturing to the simple wooden frame in the corner. I'll make do with blankets by the fire. Helena looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion and the lingering effects of her near-death experience won out. Thank you, she said softly. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same, Wade replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Plenty of men in the territory would have ridden right past, too focused on their own survival. That night, as Wade lay on the floor near the fire and listened to the storm rage outside, he found himself wondering about the woman now sleeping in his bed. Helena Knightly didn't seem like the type who belonged out here. Her clothes, though plain, were well made. Her speech, though brief, carried the accent of someone educated. What had brought her to Montana territory, and where had she been heading when the storm caught her? The next morning brought no respite from the blizzard. If anything, the snow fell heavier, the wind blew harder. Wade woke to find several inches of snow had blown under the door during the night, and when he looked out the window, he could barely see the barn. Helena stirred as he built up the fire again, her color much improved from the previous night. How are you feeling? Wade asked, setting a pot of coffee on the hook over the fire. Warmer, Helena said, sitting up slowly. Sore but alive thanks to you. That storm's not letting up anytime soon. Looks like you're stuck here for a spell. A flicker of something crossed Helena's face, worry perhaps, but she nodded. I'm sorry to impose on your hospitality. No imposition. Can't exactly throw you back out in that. Wade gestured toward the window where nothing but white was visible. Besides, I've got plenty of supplies. We won't starve. Over breakfast, simple fried cornmeal cakes and coffee, Helena told her story. She'd been traveling from St. Louis to Virginia City, where she was supposed to meet her brother, a mining engineer who'd promised her work keeping books for his company. The stage had dropped her in Verdi 2 days ago, and she'd hired a man with a wagon to take her the rest of the way. But the man had demanded more money midway through the journey, and when Helena refused, he'd simply left her, taking most of her belongings with him. The wagon was his, and he unhitched his horses and rode off, Helena explained, anger and humiliation clear in her voice. I waited, thinking he'd come back, but when the storm rolled in, I realized he wasn't going to. I tried to drive the wagon with the one horse that was left, but the poor creature was spooked by the wind. When the wagon overturned, she broke free and ran. Wade felt his jaw tighten. You remember what this man looked like? Dark hair, beard, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He said his name was Jack Potter. I know him, Wade said grimly. He's got a reputation for that kind of thing. When this storm clears, I'll see about getting your belongings back and making sure he faces some consequences." "There wasn't much of value," Helena said. "Some clothes, a few books, letters from my brother." They settled into an uneasy routine that first full day. The cabin wasn't large, maybe 15 feet by 20, with a single room serving as kitchen, living area, and bedroom. Wade did his best to give Helena privacy, but there was no avoiding the intimacy of the situation. He showed her where his supplies were kept so she could help herself to food, gave her one of his shirts to wear since her own clothes were still drying, and tried to focus on the various small tasks that needed doing. But he was acutely aware of her presence. The way she moved around the small space, the soft sound of her humming as she examined the few books he owned, the graceful way she folded the blankets. Wade had been living alone on this ranch for 3 years, ever since his father died and his mother went to live with his sister's family in Colorado. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, even preferred it, but something about having Helena here felt different than the occasional visitor who stopped by. "You have a nice home," Helena said that afternoon as she stood by the window, looking out at the unrelenting snow. "Isolated, but nice." "It suits me," Wade replied. He was working on repairing a leather harness that had been sitting in the corner for weeks. "I run cattle, though not as many as some of the bigger operations, enough to make a living." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question surprised him with its directness. Wade looked up from his work to find Helena watching him with those intelligent green eyes. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely's better than being stuck with the wrong company." "That's true enough," Helena said with a slight smile. "I've experienced enough of the wrong company to appreciate solitude." "Is that why you left St. Louis? Wrong company?" Helena turned back to the window. "Among other things, I was engaged to be married to a man my father chose. He was wealthy, established, everything my father thought was important. But he was also cruel when no one was looking and treated me like property he'd purchased. I tried to tell my father, but he didn't believe me, said I was being dramatic, ungrateful. So you ran." "I ran," Helena confirmed. "My brother Samuel is the only family member who understood. He sent me money for the journey and promised me a fresh start. Though I'm beginning to wonder if I should have stayed and faced my father's anger rather than nearly freezing to death in Montana." Wade set aside the harness and stood, walking over to stand near her at the window. "You made the right choice. Any man who treats a woman like property isn't worth marrying, wealthy or not." Helena looked up at him, and Wade noticed flecks of gold in her green eyes. "That's a surprisingly progressive view for a Montana rancher." "My mother raised me right," Wade said simply. "She always said a woman's got just as much right to choose her own path as any man, even if the law doesn't always agree." They stood there for a moment, and Wade became aware of how close they were standing, how the faint scent of the lavender soap she'd used that morning lingered around her. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Storm's supposed to last a few days according to what I heard in town. Might be stuck together for a spell." "I've had worse company," Helena said with a warmth in her voice that made something in Wade's chest tighten. The second day of the blizzard, Wade went out to check on his horse and discovered that the storm had damaged part of the barn roof. Snow was getting in, and the temperature was dangerous even for his hardy stallion. He spent 2 hours in the brutal cold, patching the roof as best he could with materials he had on hand, and when he finally stumbled back into the cabin, he was covered in snow and shaking. Helena took one look at him and sprang into action. She had him strip off his frozen outer layers, wrapped him in blankets, and pushed him into the chair nearest the fire. Then she made hot coffee laced with a bit of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes, and forced him to drink it while she rubbed warmth back into his hands. "Foolish man," she scolded, though her touch was gentle. "You could have lost fingers out there." "Horse needed help," Wade managed through chattering teeth. "Couldn't leave him." Noble, but still foolish. As sensation returned to his extremities in painful prickles, Wade found himself studying Helena's face as she focused on warming his hands. She'd been here just over a day, but already the cabin felt different. Warmer somehow, though that had nothing to do with the fire. He'd grown so accustomed to silence that the sound of another voice, another person's breathing, another presence should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt right in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Why aren't you married?" Helena asked suddenly, still rubbing his hands. "You're what, 30? 28, Wade corrected. "And I guess I never found the right woman." "Most women around here are already spoken for, and the few single ones seem more interested in the bigger ranches, the men who'll give them an easier life." "Easier isn't always better." "No, it's not." Helena met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding or recognition. Then she released his hands and stood, moving to stir the pot of stew that was their perpetual meal. By the third day, they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Wade would wake first, build up the fire and start coffee. Helena would wake shortly after and make breakfast while he went to check on the horse and bring in more firewood. They'd eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Helena told him about growing up in St. Louis, the balls and parties that bored her senseless, the books she loved to read. Wade shared stories about life on the ranch, about his parents and his two sisters, about the harsh beauty of Montana that got under your skin until nowhere else felt like home. In the afternoons, they'd read. Wade only had 5 books in the cabin, but Helena read passages aloud from them, her voice bringing new life to stories he'd read dozens of times. Sometimes he'd work on small tasks while she read, fixing things around the cabin that he'd been putting off, but mostly he just listened, captivated by the sound of her voice. Evenings, they'd play cards with his worn deck, betting matches since neither had money to spare. Helena was surprisingly good at poker, and Wade suspected she'd spent time playing despite her refined upbringing. "My brother taught me," she admitted after winning her 5th hand in a row. "He said a woman should know how to handle herself in all situations, even improper ones." "I like your brother already," Wade said, dealing another hand. "He'd like you too," Helena replied, studying her cards. "He always said I should find a man with substance rather than style, someone real." The implication hung in the air between them, but neither acknowledged it directly. Still, Wade noticed how their hands would brush when passing things, how their eyes would meet and linger, how the space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. On the 4th day, the wind finally died down, though snow continued to fall. Wade ventured outside and discovered drifts as high as the cabin's windows in places. It would be days before he could dig out enough to attempt the ride to Verde, and even then, the roads would be treacherous. "Looks like you're stuck with me a while longer," he told Helena when he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots. "What a terrible fate," she said, but she was smiling. She'd been kneading bread dough and flour dusted her cheek. Without thinking, Wade reached out and brushed it away with his thumb. Helena went still, her eyes locked on his, and for a moment he thought about kissing her, wanted to kiss her with an intensity that surprised him, but he dropped his hand and stepped back. "Sorry, you had flour on your face." "Thank you," Helena said softly, and went back to her bread with pink cheeks. That evening, after a dinner of fresh bread and rabbit stew made from a rabbit Wade had shot that morning, they sat by the fire and talked late into the night. Helena asked about his plans for the ranch, and Wade found himself sharing dreams he'd never spoken aloud before. He wanted to expand his herd, improve his stock, maybe even bring in some of the new breeds he'd heard about. He wanted to build a bigger house eventually, something solid that would last generations. "It sounds wonderful," Helena said wistfully. "Building something lasting, making your mark on the land. What about you? What do you want?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I want to matter," she finally said. "I want my life to mean something beyond being someone's wife or daughter. I want to use my mind, contribute something." "Is that strange?" "No," Wade said firmly. "It's not strange at all." They talked until the fire burned low, and when Helena finally went to bed, Wade lay awake on his blankets, thinking about the woman sleeping just feet away. He'd known her less than a week, but something fundamental had shifted in him. The cabin that had always felt adequate now seemed too small, too sparse. He found himself imagining it through Helena's eyes and wanting to make it better, more comfortable, more like a home than just a shelter. The snow finally stopped on the 5th day, though the sky remained heavy and gray with the promise of more to come. Wade began the arduous task of digging out, creating paths to the barn and to the necessary outbuildings. Helena helped where she could, though he tried to keep her inside where it was warm. "I'm not made of glass," she protested when he suggested she stay by the fire. "I can help." So they worked together, and Wade found he enjoyed the simple pleasure of shared labor. Helena was stronger than she looked, and she didn't complain even when the work was hard and cold. They took breaks to warm up, drinking hot coffee and catching their breath, their conversation flowing easily. "When the road's clear, I'll need to get you to Virginia City," Wade said during one such break, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. "Your brother will be worried." Helena's expression clouded. "Yes, I suppose you will." "Unless," Wade started, then stopped. What was he about to say? That she should stay, that the thought of her leaving felt like losing something precious. They barely knew each other. A week trapped together in a blizzard didn't mean anything real, except it did, at least to him. "Unless what?" Helena prompted. "Nothing, just thinking out loud." But Helena moved closer, her eyes searching his face. "Wade, I need to tell you something." Before she could continue, they heard the distant sound of gunshots. Wade's head snapped up, his hand automatically moving to the rifle he'd propped against the cabin wall when they came outside. 3 shots, spaced evenly, then a pause, then 3 more. A distress signal. "Stay here," Wade commanded, grabbing his rifle and his heavy coat. "Like hell," Helena said, following him back into the cabin to grab her own coat. "If someone needs help, an extra pair of hands could be useful." Wade wanted to argue, but more shots rang out, closer now. Someone was riding toward his place and they were in trouble. He quickly loaded his rifle and his pistol, handing the pistol to Helena. "Do you know how to use this?" "My brother taught me," Helena said, checking the weapon with practiced ease. "I'm a decent shot." They waited, watching through the window as a horse and rider appeared through the snow-covered landscape. The rider was slumped forward, clearly injured, and 2 more horses were visible behind, gaining ground. Wade cursed under his breath as he recognized the situation. Someone running from pursuers, and those pursuers weren't giving up. "Get away from the window," Wade ordered, moving to the door. He stepped outside just as the fleeing rider reached his property, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder. "Please," the young man gasped. "They're going to kill me." The pursuing riders, 2 rough-looking men Wade didn't recognize, pulled up when they saw Wade standing on his porch with a rifle. "That boy's a thief," one of them shouted. "Stole from us. We just want what's ours." "I didn't steal anything," the young man protested weakly. "They're trying to jump my father's land. They killed him," And now they want to kill me too." Wade's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories about men using the harsh winter to settle scores, knowing the law was far away and witnesses scarce. "Get inside," he told the young man, keeping his rifle trained on the two riders. "You two get off my property." "You're making a mistake, friend," the second rider said, his hand moving toward his gun. "I'm not your friend, and the only mistake will be yours if you draw that weapon," Wade replied calmly. "Now ride out while you still can." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Helena appeared in the doorway, pistol in hand, and aimed steadily at the riders. "You heard him," she said, her voice cold and clear. "Leave." The presence of a woman, especially one armed and clearly willing to shoot, seemed to change the calculation for the two men. They exchanged glances, then turned their horses. "This ain't over," one called back as they rode away. Wade waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle and helping the injured young man inside. Helena was already tearing strips from a clean cloth, preparing to tend to the wound. "I'm Thomas," the young man said through gritted teeth as Helena examined his shoulder. "Thomas Whitley. My father had a claim about 10 miles north. Those men showed up a week ago saying he'd agreed to sell, but Pa never would have. Next thing I know, Pa's dead, shot during a supposed argument, and they're saying the land is theirs. When I tried to fight it, they came after me." "The bullet went through," Helena announced, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Thomas gasp. "You're lucky. It missed anything vital." Wade paced the cabin, his mind working. The law was scarce in this part of Montana territory, and what law existed was often corrupt or simply overwhelmed. Men like these two who'd chased Thomas operated in the gaps, taking what they wanted and killing anyone who got in their way. "They'll be back," Wade said. "Maybe not today, but soon. They can't leave witnesses who know what they did." "I should go," Thomas said, trying to rise despite Helena's restraining hand. "I don't want to bring trouble to you." "You'll do no such thing," Helena said firmly. "You're injured and it's still freezing out there. Besides, Wade already chose a side when he told them to leave." She was right, of course. Wade had made his decision the moment he let Thomas inside. "You'll stay until you're healed enough to travel, and then we'll figure out what to do about those men and your father's claim." Over the next few days, the dynamics in the cabin shifted again. Thomas was young but tough, and he healed quickly under Helena's care. He was grateful for their help and tried to make himself useful despite his injury, doing what work he could around the cabin. Wade found himself watching Helena with Thomas, noting how gentle she was with the young man, how patient. She'd make an excellent mother someday, he caught himself thinking, then immediately pushed the thought away. What right did he have to think about Helena in those terms? She was a guest, a refugee from the storm who would leave as soon as the weather permitted. The fact that he'd spent the last week falling hopelessly in love with her didn't change reality, except Helena seemed in no hurry to leave. When Wade mentioned taking her to Virginia City, once the roads cleared enough for travel, she'd find reasons to delay. She needed to make sure Thomas was all right. She wanted to help Wade catch up on the work that had fallen behind during the storm. She'd heard another storm was coming, and it made sense to wait it out. Wade didn't push. He told himself he was just being practical, that it made sense for her to wait for better weather, but the truth was he wanted every extra day he could get with her. One evening, after Thomas had gone to sleep in the corner they'd set up for him, Wade and Helena sat by the fire as had become their habit. Helena was mending one of Wade's shirts, her needle moving with practiced precision. "You don't have to do that," Wade said. "You're a guest, not hired help." "I want to," Helena replied. "Besides, I need to earn my keep somehow." "You don't need to earn anything. You're welcome here for as long as you want to stay." Helena looked up from her sewing, meeting his eyes. What if I want to stay a very long time? Wade's heart hammered in his chest. What about your brother? Your job in Virginia City? I could write to Samuel, have him send my things here instead. Helena set down the shirt and sewing needle. Wade, I know this is sudden. I know we've only known each other a short time. But these past weeks, I've been happier than I've been in years. I wake up excited to start the day. I go to sleep content. When I think about leaving, about going to Virginia City to keep books for some mining company, it feels like giving up something precious. Helena, Wade started, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Let me finish, she interrupted. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm not throwing myself at you. I'm just saying that if you're willing, I'd like to stay. I could keep house, help with the ranch work, maybe even raise chickens or keep a garden come spring. I could write to Samuel, explain the situation. I'm sure he'd understand, and if he doesn't, well, I'm old enough to make my own choices. Wade crossed the space between them in 2 strides, kneeling in front of her chair. Helena, I've been half crazy wondering how to ask you to stay without sounding like a fool. You've been here just over 2 weeks, and somehow you've become essential. This cabin, this life, it all feels empty when I imagine you gone. Helena's hands came up to cup his face, her touch gentle. Then I'll stay, if you'll have me. If I'll have you, Wade laughed, the sound rough with emotion. Helena Knightly, having you here is the best thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember. Then he kissed her, finally giving in to the desire that had been building since that first day. Helena kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers threading through his hair as his arms wrapped around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he admitted quietly. Probably already fallen, if I'm honest. Good, Helena whispered, because I'm falling in love with you too. They sat together by the fire long after it burned down to embers, talking about the future. Wade shared his dreams for the ranch in more detail, and Helena offered ideas and suggestions that showed she'd been thinking about it too, imagining herself as part of that future. They talked about practical matters, how they'd explain her presence to the neighbors, what they'd tell her family. We should get married, Wade said suddenly. I mean, properly married with a preacher and everything. I know it's fast, but people will talk less if you're here as my wife rather than just living with me. Wade Emerson, was that a proposal? Helena asked, though she was smiling. A terrible one, Wade admitted. You deserve better. Flowers and pretty words and a proper ring. I don't need any of that, Helena said. I just need you, but yes, I'll marry you, as soon as we can arrange it. They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Wade felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he'd never experienced before. He'd saved a stranger from a blizzard, and somehow she'd saved him right back from a life that was merely existence rather than truly living. The next morning, Wade told Thomas about their plans. The young man grinned despite his lingering pain. I had a feeling something was happening between you two. The way you look at each other, it's pretty obvious. Once you're healed up enough, I'll take you into Verdi, Wade said. We need to talk to the marshal about those men who killed your father, and Helena and I need to see the preacher. What about your ranch, your father's claim? Helena asked Thomas. Thomas's expression darkened. Those men probably have someone filing papers, making it all look legal. Even if we get the marshal involved, proving they murdered my father will be near impossible. It'll be my word against theirs. Not quite, Wade said thoughtfully. I saw them chasing you, threatening you. That's witness testimony. And if we can get them to admit to anything, or find proof they've done this before, we might have a case. Over the next week, As Thomas continued to heal and Wade worked on clearing snow and tending to his cattle, they formed a plan. Wade would ride into Verdi, talk to the marshal, and see what could be done about Thomas's situation. He'd also make arrangements with the preacher and file the necessary paperwork for his marriage to Helena. Helena insisted on coming with him. "I'm not staying behind while you ride into potential danger," she said firmly. "Those men might be watching the town, waiting for Thomas to show up." "She's got a point," Thomas agreed. "They don't know about her. She could be extra eyes, watch your back." Wade didn't like the idea of putting Helena in danger, but he also recognized the wisdom in their arguments. So on a cold but clear morning in mid-December, Wade and Helena set out for Verdi, leaving Thomas at the cabin with instructions to bar the door and shoot anyone who tried to force their way in. The ride took most of the day. The snow was deep in places, the trails treacherous, but Wade's horse was sure-footed and Helena proved to be an excellent rider. They talked as they rode, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air, and Wade felt a contentment he'd never known. This woman beside him, who'd faced down armed men without flinching, who'd nursed a stranger back to health, who'd chosen a hard life on a Montana ranch over comfort and security, was going to be his wife. Verdi was a small town, barely more than a wide spot in the trail with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a few other businesses clustered around a single muddy street. But it had a marshal's office and a church, and that was what mattered. They found Marshal Hutchins in his office, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed little. Wade explained the situation with Thomas, providing every detail he could remember about the two men who'd pursued the young man to his cabin. "I know who you're talking about," Hutchins said grimly. "Jake and Cal Morton. Brothers. They've been suspected in several claim disputes over the past year, but we've never had enough evidence to bring charges. Men end up dead, claims get transferred, but it's always painted as legal or accidental." "So what can we do?" Helena asked. Hutchins studied her with interest. "You must be the young lady who was caught in the blizzard. Word got around that Potter abandoned someone. He's been bragging about it in the saloon." Wade felt anger surge through him. "Where can I find Potter?" "Wade," Helena said, placing a hand on his arm. "Let the marshal handle it." "The lady's right," Hutchins said. "I've been wanting to have words with Potter myself about his business practices. As for the Morton brothers, with your testimony about what you witnessed, I can at least bring them in for questioning. It's not much, but it's a start." They spent another hour with the marshal, going over details and signing statements. Hutchins promised to ride out to Wade's cabin in the next few days to get Thomas's statement as well, and to keep an eye out for the Morton brothers. Afterward, Wade and Helena walked to the small church at the edge of town. Reverend Matthews was a kind man who'd known Wade since he was a boy, and he listened to their story with a gentle smile. "I'd be honored to marry you," he said when they finished. "When were you thinking?" "As soon as possible," Wade replied. "We're not looking for anything fancy. Just want to make it legal and proper." "How about tomorrow morning?" the Reverend suggested. "That'll give me time to prepare the paperwork and give you two a chance to rest from your journey. You can stay at the boarding house tonight." Wade had been planning on them staying at the boarding house anyway, in separate rooms of course, but something in the Reverend's tone suggested he understood the urgency of their situation. A woman living on a ranch with a single man would cause talk, but if they were married, even if the courtship had been brief, people would accept it. They secured 2 rooms at the boarding house, then visited the general store where Wade purchased a simple gold band for Helena and Helena picked out fabric for a new dress. The storekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, was a notorious gossip, but her eyes were kind as she helped Helena choose. "You're the one who nearly froze," Mrs. Patterson said. "We heard about it. That was fortunate, Wade finding you." "Very fortunate," Helena agreed, meeting Wade's eyes across the store. "And now you're getting married. That's quite a whirlwind romance." "When you know," Wade said simply. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "My late husband proposed after knowing me 3 days. We had 40 good years together before he passed. Sometimes the quick decisions are the right ones." That evening, Wade and Helena had dinner at the boarding house. A simple meal of roast chicken and potatoes, but it felt like a celebration. Tomorrow they'd be married, and all the unspoken feelings, all the careful distance they'd maintained, would finally be resolved. "Are you nervous?" Wade asked as they lingered over coffee after the meal. "No," Helena said. "Are you?" "Not about marrying you, but I want you to be happy, Helena. This life, it's not easy. The winters are brutal, the work is hard, and I can't promise you luxury or comfort." Helena reached across the table and took his hand. "I don't want luxury or comfort. I want a partner, someone who respects me and values me. I want to build something meaningful. I want love. You offer all of that." "I do love you," Wade said. "I know it's fast. I know people will think we're crazy, but I love you." "I love you too," Helena replied, "and I don't care what anyone else thinks." They parted at the top of the stairs, each heading to their separate rooms, though Wade found it harder than ever to sleep alone knowing Helena was just down the hall. Tomorrow she'd be his wife, and the thought filled him with a mixture of excitement and protectiveness. He'd spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted choosing him, choosing this life. The wedding took place the next morning in the small church, with Marshall Hutchins and Mrs. Patterson serving as witnesses. Helena wore the new dress she'd made from the fabric purchased the day before, simple blue wool that matched her eyes, and she'd woven small sprigs of dried lavender into her dark hair. She was the most beautiful thing Wade had ever seen. The ceremony was short and simple. Wade placed the gold band on Helena's finger, his own hand shaking slightly, and when Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Wade kissed his bride with all the love and promise he could convey. Helena kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and when they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Well then," Marshall Hutchins said with a grin, "congratulations to you both. Try to stay out of trouble, will you?" "We'll do our best," Wade promised, though given the situation with the Morton brothers and Thomas, he wasn't sure how realistic that was. They stayed one more night in Verdi, this time sharing a room as husband and wife, and Wade discovered that falling in love with Helena was nothing compared to the joy of being loved by her in return. She was passionate and tender, bold and shy, and everything he'd ever wanted without knowing it. The next morning, they began the journey back to the ranch. Wade had purchased supplies in town, including fabric and sewing supplies for Helena, seeds for a spring garden, and ammunition because he had a feeling they'd need it before this business with the Morton brothers was settled. As they rode, Helena talked about her plans for the cabin. "We could add a room," she suggested. "Maybe two. And I'd like to paint the walls, make curtains. It needs a woman's touch." "It needs your touch," Wade corrected. "You can change anything you want. It's your home now, too." When they arrived back at the cabin, Thomas greeted them with relief. "No trouble while you were gone, but I've been watching the horizon. Those Morton brothers worry me." "They should," Wade said, recounting their conversation with the marshal. "Hutchins will be out here in a few days to take your statement. Until then, we stay alert." The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Wade worked on the ranch, checking his cattle and repairing winter damage, while Helena transformed the cabin into a true home. She sewed curtains and cushions, reorganized the storage, and started planning the garden she'd plant come spring. Thomas, nearly fully healed, helped where he could and proved to be a hard worker. Marshal Hutchins arrived as promised, took Thomas's statement, and shared news from town. The Morton brothers left the area, heard I was asking questions, and decided to make themselves scarce. I've sent word to other marshals in the territory to be on the lookout. What about Thomas's claim? Helena asked, still working on that. The paperwork they filed has some irregularities. Might be able to prove fraud, which would void the transfer. It'll take time, but there's hope. After Hutchins left, Thomas approached Wade and Helena with a proposition. Once my claim is settled, I was thinking I could work it again, build it back up. But I'm young, inexperienced. I was wondering if maybe we could be partners of sorts. You could advise me, help me get established, and I could help you with your ranch work. We'd be neighbors helping each other. Wade looked at Helena, who nodded encouragingly. I think that's a fine idea, Wade said, extending his hand to shake Thomas's. We could use a reliable neighbor and you could use guidance. It's a deal. Christmas came, and Helena made it special with decorations made from pine boughs and berries, a feast of roasted venison and all the trimmings, and small gifts she'd managed to make or purchase. Wade gave her a beautiful shawl he'd bought from a traveling merchant, and she gave him a new shirt she'd sewn, embroidered with his initials. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," Helena said that night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind outside. "Last year at this time, I was in St. Louis, miserable and trapped. Now I'm here, married to a wonderful man with a home and purpose." "I'm the lucky one," Wade said, pulling her closer. "You could have married someone wealthy, lived in comfort." "I don't want comfort," Helena said. "I want this, I want you." January brought brutal cold and more snow, but the cabin was warm and well stocked. Thomas moved to the barn, making himself a comfortable space there to give the newlyweds more privacy. He spent his days helping Wade with the ranch work and his evenings reading or playing cards with them. In February, news came that the Morton brothers had been arrested in Wyoming territory for murder. Turned out they'd tried the same scheme there and gotten careless. With their arrest, Thomas's claim was cleared, and he was able to return to his father's land. But he didn't go far, just 10 miles north, and he visited often, becoming like a younger brother to both Wade and Helena. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Wade started planning for the coming season, and Helena began preparing her garden plot. They talked about the future, about adding on to the cabin, about the children they hoped to have someday. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Helena turned to Wade with shining eyes. "You remember what I said that first night, about wanting my life to matter, wanting to contribute something meaningful?" "I remember," Wade said. "I've found it, here with you, building this life, creating a home, being your partner. It matters, I matter, and I'm happier than I ever imagined possible." Wade kissed her softly. "You've always mattered. I'm just grateful I get to spend my life showing you that." April arrived with warmth and rain, and the landscape transformed. Green shoots pushed through the earth, wildflowers bloomed, and Helena's garden began to grow. They worked side by side, planting and building, and Wade marveled at how strong she was, how capable. She'd arrived as a city woman fleeing a bad situation, but she was becoming a rancher's wife in the best sense, embracing the work and the life. One morning in mid-April, Helena woke feeling sick. She tried to hide it, but Wade noticed immediately. "You all right?" he asked with concern. "I'm fine," Helena said, though she looked pale. "Just my stomach's a bit unsettled." Over the next few days, the sickness continued, always in the morning, and Helena began to suspect what it meant. She waited another week to be sure, then told Wade her suspicions one evening as they prepared for bed. "I think I might be pregnant," she said softly. Wade's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but the signs are there. We won't know for certain for a while yet, but I think so." Wade pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Helena asked, though she could feel his joy in the way he held her. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Wade said. "But are you ready for this? It's so soon." "I'm ready," Helena assured him. "This is what I want, a family with you." As spring progressed, Helena's pregnancy became more apparent. She bloomed with it, her skin glowing and her happiness evident. Wade became even more protective, trying to keep her from heavy work, though Helena insisted she was fine. Thomas visited regularly, and when he learned about the baby, he was thrilled. "I'm going to be an uncle," he declared. "Well, an honorary uncle anyway." In May, Helena received a letter from her brother Samuel. Wade had written to him months before, explaining the situation and his marriage to Helena, and Samuel's response finally arrived. He was surprised but supportive, saying he was glad Helena had found happiness and asking them to visit Virginia City when they could so he could meet Wade. "We'll go after the baby comes," Helena said, reading the letter for the third time. "I want Samuel to meet his niece or nephew." "You think it's a girl?" Wade asked. "I don't know, but I have a feeling it might be a boy, big and strong like his father." Summer brought long days of work. Wade and Thomas partnered on a cattle drive, moving both their herds to better grazing land, while Helena managed the ranch in Wade's absence. She proved more than capable, and when Wade returned a week later, sunburned and exhausted, he found everything running smoothly. "You're amazing," he told her that night. "Most women couldn't have handled all that alone, especially while carrying a child." "I'm not most women," Helena said with a smile. "And I wasn't alone. The neighbors checked in on me every day." Wade had worried about how the neighbors would receive Helena, whether they'd judge her for the quick marriage or her different background. But Helena had won them over with her friendliness and her willingness to help anyone who needed it. She'd nursed Mrs. Patterson's daughter through a fever, helped the blacksmith's wife with her laundry when the woman hurt her back, and traded garden vegetables for other goods. She'd become part of the community. As summer faded into fall, Helena's belly grew round and full. Wade added a room onto the cabin, creating a nursery for the baby and giving them more space. Helena sewed baby clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival of their child. In October, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air grew crisp, Helena went into labor. Wade rode like mad to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who served as the area's midwife, and then spent the longest hours of his life pacing outside while Mrs. Patterson and two neighbor women attended Helena. Finally, just before dawn, he heard the thin cry of a newborn, and Mrs. Patterson emerged with a smile. "You have a son," she announced. "Big, healthy boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Wade rushed inside to find Helena exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. "Wade, meet your son," she said softly. Wade approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. His son. The baby had dark hair like Helena and a strong cry that spoke of healthy lungs. "He's perfect," Wade whispered. "I want to name him after your father," Helena said, "if that's all right with you." Wade's father had been named Walter, and the thought of his son carrying that name filled Wade with emotion. "Walter Emerson," he said. "It's perfect." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant activity. Walter was a hungry, energetic baby who demanded attention, but Wade and Helena took to parenthood with joy. Wade would walk the floor with his son in the middle of the night, singing off key lullabies while Helena would watch them with love in her eyes. Thomas visited often, clearly smitten with his honorary nephew. He'd hold Walter with surprising gentleness for such a young man, and Wade suspected Thomas was lonely in his rebuilt cabin up north. "You should think about finding a wife," Helena told Thomas one day. "You're 21 now, established. Surely there's some girl who's caught your eye." Thomas blushed. "There might be someone. The school teacher in Verdi, Miss Sarah, but I don't know if she'd be interested in a ranch hand." "You're not just a ranch hand," Wade corrected. "You're a property owner with good prospects. Any woman would be lucky to have you." By the time Walter was 6 months old, Thomas had worked up the courage to court Miss Sarah, and by his first birthday, Thomas and Sarah were married. They settled on Thomas's ranch, and the two families became even closer, celebrating holidays together and helping each other through difficulties. Helena proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, but she never lost the independence and strength that Wade had first admired. She continued to work on the ranch, manage their finances, and contribute in every way. They were true partners, and their love only deepened as time passed. One evening in the spring, 2 years after that fateful blizzard, Wade and Helena sat on their porch watching the sunset while Walter played at their feet. The cabin had grown into a proper house with 4 rooms, and Helena's garden flourished. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked. "Staying here instead of going to Virginia City. This life is hard, harder than anything you knew before." Helena looked at him with those green eyes he'd fallen in love with and smiled. "Not for a single moment. That day the blizzard brought me here, I was running from a life that was suffocating me. I thought I'd be starting over in Virginia City, making do. Instead, I found everything I'd been searching for without even knowing it. I found home. I found purpose. I found love." "I don't want to leave you," Wade said, remembering her words from that spring morning when he'd first suggested taking her to Virginia City. "You said those words to me, and they changed my life." "I don't want to leave you," Helena repeated, leaning in to kiss him. "I never will." Walter toddled over, demanding attention, and Wade scooped him up, settling the boy between them. They sat there as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant colors, a family carved out of chance and choice, hardship and love. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Harsh winters, summer droughts, cattle diseases, and economic difficulties. But Wade and Helena faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace, and another son named Samuel after Helena's brother. The house grew again to accommodate their expanding family. Thomas and Sarah had children of their own, and the 2 families remained close. The children grew up together, more like siblings than friends, riding horses across the shared land and helping with ranch work as they got older. Helena never returned to St. Louis. She wrote to her brother regularly, and Samuel visited once, impressed by the life his sister had built and the man she'd married. Her father sent a single letter after learning of her marriage, cold and disapproving, but Helena read it and filed it away without regret. She'd made her choice, and she'd never been happier. Wade expanded the ranch over the years, fulfilling the dreams he'd shared with Helena that first winter. He became known throughout Montana territory as a fair dealer and a good neighbor, and much of that reputation came from Helena's influence. She'd brought not just love into his life, but wisdom and compassion. As their children grew, Wade and Helena made sure they understood the value of hard work, the importance of treating everyone with respect, and the power of love that chose to stay even when leaving would be easier. They told the story of how they met, how a blizzard had brought them together, and how Helena had chosen to stay when spring came. Walter, their eldest, became a rancher like his father. Grace went east for education, but returned to Montana with a lawyer husband, settling in Verde where she fought for women's rights and property protections. Samuel became a veterinarian, traveling throughout the territory caring for animals. The house that had started as a simple cabin became a gathering place, always full of family and friends. Helena's garden became legendary in the area, producing abundantly year after year. The ranch prospered, providing not just for the Emerson family but creating jobs for others in the community. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Helena with a trip to Virginia City to visit her brother and see the city she'd never reached that long ago winter. They stayed for 2 weeks, enjoying theaters and restaurants, but both were eager to return home. "It's nice to visit," Helena said as their train carried them back toward Montana. "But I don't belong here anymore. I belong there with you on our ranch." "Our ranch," Wade repeated, loving how naturally she claimed it as hers. "You know, I've been thinking. We should write down our story, how we met, for the grandchildren someday." Helena smiled. "The story of how a desperate woman stumbled into a blizzard and found her destiny. I like it, though I wasn't stumbling, I was trying to survive. And you did more than survive. You thrived. We thrived." They returned to find the ranch running smoothly under Walter's management. At 23, their son had grown into a capable man, ready to eventually take over operations. Grace visited regularly from Verde, and Samuel had just graduated from veterinary school. As Wade and Helena moved into their 50s, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility. They spent their days working in the garden, riding across their land, and enjoying the peace they'd built together. One evening, sitting on the porch as they'd done thousands of times before, Helena took Wade's hand. "Do you remember when I told you I didn't want to leave?" "Every day," Wade said. "Best words I ever heard. I want you to know if I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it, because it led to this, to us, to our family, to this life." Wade pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You saved me, you know. I was existing, not living. Then you walked into my cabin wrapped in blankets and changed everything." "We saved each other," Helena corrected. "You gave me shelter from the storm, and I gave you a reason to want more than mere survival. We built this together." As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in familiar, brilliant colors, Wade reflected on the truth of her words. That blizzard 25 years ago had seemed like a disaster, but it had brought him the greatest gift of his life. Helena hadn't just stayed through that winter. She'd stayed through every season that followed, through hardship and joy, building a life and a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their grandchildren would play in this house, work this land, and hear the story of how their grandparents met. They'd learn that sometimes the storms that seem like endings are actually beginnings. That love can bloom in the harshest conditions. That home isn't a place but a person, and family is what you build together. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Wade and Helena sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts forever joined. The stranger he'd sheltered during a blizzard had become his wife, his partner, his love. And when spring had come all those years ago and she'd said she didn't want to leave, she'd given him the future he'd always dreamed of but never dared to hope for. Their story wasn't just about falling in love. It was about choosing love day after day, year after year. It was about two people who'd found each other in the storm and decided to weather every storm thereafter together. It was about building something lasting in a harsh land, about creating beauty and warmth in the wilderness. And as they rose to go inside, to the home they'd made together, filled with the memories of a quarter-century of marriage and the promise of many years to come. Wade knew that every difficult moment, every hardship, every challenge had been worth it, because it had brought him here to this moment with this woman. Helena had said she didn't want to leave, and she never did. She stayed through it all, and in staying, she'd made his life complete. Their love story, born in a blizzard and forged in the demanding life of Montana Territory, had become the foundation upon which an entire family was built. And it would endure, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love that chooses to stay even when leaving would be easier. As they climbed into bed that night, Wade pulled Helena close one last time. "I love you," he whispered, as he'd done thousands of times before. "I love you too," Helena replied, as she always did, forever and always. And in that moment, in that house they'd built together, surrounded by the life they'd created, Wade Emerson knew he was the luckiest man alive. He'd sheltered a stranger during a blizzard, and she'd stayed to shelter his heart for the rest of their days.